Myanmar is obviously the Stalinist Jew Burma. So where he worked for Power Construction Corporation of China, so the communist, a state-owned group, upgrading, or a Jewish-owned group, upgrading the electricity grid. In 2011, hungry for more adventure, he packed his bags and headed for Nigeria. Well, let me tell you, Chinese people don't have the freedoms of packing their bags like in America. They get told to pack the bags and head for Nigeria or wherever. So we're still barely 30 years old. He was tapped up to manage the Ogun State Free Trade Zone, a private-public project in which the local government provides the land and Chinese enterprise the capital. So you got some dirt and some Chinese with some American dollars, all provided for by the Jew. Mr. Wu is one of hundreds of thousands of Chinese citizens. A common estimate is about 1 million. Who have ventured to Africa over the past 2 decades to seek their fortune. Like many who have ended up there, he sees in Africa's raw energy and ambition an echo of the forces that were unleashed by Deng Xiaoping's reforms of 1978, and that was for China to open up when they were actually wearing blue suits and all they could eat was cabbage. So yeah, China, Nigeria. It's like the China of the 70s and 80s when you could open a business and maybe earn a fortune. And a fortune in China in them days was not a lot of money when you amassed a fortune. Like in the 90s, even the 2000s, there was like $20, 20 could get you just tons of stuff. Those kinds of fortunes are not possible in China today. China is off the charts. America is not getting their investment back from Israel into China, into Africa. People like Mr. Wu have been persuaded to test their ambition in far-flung corners of the world. Hang on, it just said it packed his bags. So this was FT.com, the Financial Times. So we're rising. So far-flung corners of the world by tougher business conditions in China, where rising labour costs, industrial overcapacity, and more stringent environmental standards are taking their toll. China's going backwards. China has gone from a rice-producing country into an academic hellhole, industrial hellhole. Like the academia is supposed to supply industry, but they're not actually going to produce nothing except plastic toys, and there's no return on investment for Americans, and America has always been the hub of industrial innovation. This is important news, people. While many entrepreneurs have looked closer to home, to countries such as Cambodia, others have struck out to Africa. It is China's massive infrastructure projects, including dams, railways, ports and telecommunication networks, that capture most attention. Between 2000 and 2014, the stock of Chinese investment in Africa went from 2% of US levels to 55%. McKinsey estimates that at the current breakneck pace, China will surpass US levels within a decade. America hasn't got any money. Israel's stolen it all and poured it all into China via Wall Street. And Israel is, whatever funds that are made, Israel will steal. America's getting no money back from investments in China. Washington has belatedly woken up to China's growing presence, which is transforming both the physical and diplomatic landscape of Africa. In December, John Bolton, President Donald Trump's national security advisor, accused China of using bribes opaque agreement and a strategic use of debt to hold states in Africa captive to Beijing's wishes and demands. China and Nigeria. Chinese companies operate, so there's 10,000 Chinese companies operating in Africa, including 920 in Nigeria and 800 and something in Zambia. 500 billion US dollars, the value of African industrial output handled by Chinese businesses, about 12% of the total. 9% manufacturing's contribution to Nigerian gross domestic product in 2017. This is China and Africa. I'm telling you, these people are like locusts. And this is on the 27th of March 2019. I wasn't online then because all of my money, not that I had any, has dried up. You know, there's no construction work in Britain anymore. For the first time last year, 2018, the construction industry went into debt. It was the last industry that wasn't in deficit, and now they've actually crushed it. So there's no actual production, or there's no positive equity production in the whole of UK currently. Yet large companies such as Huawei and big state-affiliated companies such as China Bridge and Road are not the only Chinese actors reshaping the continent. I mean, come on, how much? They're everywhere. What officials in Washington may not fully understand is that thousands of hard-scrabble entrepreneurs like Mr. Wu, involved in everything from retail and factories to farming, are having just as big an impact. Because they're doing it all on borrowed money. Irene Yuan Sun, an associate partner at McKinsey and author of a book on Chinese investment in Africa, says the influence is particularly strong in manufacturing. Chinese manufacturing investment is the best hope that Africa has to industrialize in this generation, she says. Chinese involvement in Africa is not just about the state-driven efforts. A just as large, if not larger, component is these private enterprises, I nearly said pirate enterprises, which are more job-intensive, which localise quicker, and which have a much larger economic and social impact. So the big move from, or rather, the big move into the Chinese markets with the investments was supposed to be that China would be, you know, up in the ante and would be producing all the goods as a supplement to Western industrial innovation practices, and that, you know, Western industry would be allowed to soar as it should. And yeah, you've got those little boards with wheels on, but other than that, you haven't got much more else. You know, I can't see any floating cities coming off where, you know, the world population is being given 2/3 of the surface of the planet to live on, so that everyone can prosper. I'm not seeing that. So when Mr. Wu first came to Ogun, there was virtually nothing in place. Now this is exactly what happened in Harbin. In Harbin, right, we'll go into this quickly. Harbin Jews. Harbin Jews, right. Harbin is in China. So the Japanese occupation of northeast China in 1931 and the establishment of Manchukuo in 1932 had a negative impact on the Harbin Jewish community, 13,000 people in 1929. Most of those Jews left Harbin for Tianjin, which is the city that is next to, it's one of 4 provinces, there's 4 provinces now in China. There is Beijing, which is a city and a province, Tianjin, which is a city and a province, Shanghai, which is a city and a province, and also the latest one is Chongqing, which is a city and a province, and is also the largest city in the world now, which took 10 years to build, in, like, most lately with the Three Gorges Dam. So that's where they went, and they went to British Palestinian Mandate. until 1939, the Russian Jews were about 5,000 in Shanghai. Right, so here it is, the Jews of Harbin, China, on the Beit Hatfutsot website. You're in for a shock and a half here. A historian and researcher with the Department of History, Akfa College Education Israel, specializing in the history of Central Asia. The city of Harbin is the capital of Heilongjiang province in northern Manchuria, northeast China. Bear in mind, Manchuria was the rulers, the Manchu rulers after the Ming dynasty had sort of collapsed. And the Ming was the high culture. So in 19th century, Harbin was not a city, but only the general reference to a cluster of small villages on the banks of the Songhua River. So like it's just said there on the FT page, the Financial Times, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. So Harbin's development began with the start of the Russian invasion of Manchuria towards the end of the 19th century. The Russo-Manchurian Treaty of 1897 granted Russia the concession to build the Chinese Eastern Railway, which you're going to hear more about that now, and Harbin then became its administrative centre with a 50-kilometre wide zone along the railway. And if you know anything about railways, you know that the Chinese built the railways from the west coast into the centre after much of the European workers, slaves, legged it to California at the Klondike era, the gold rush. So the chief engineer of the building board of the Chinese Eastern Railway was Alexander Yugovich, born into a Jewish family that converted to Orthodox Christianity. He was a civil engineer and specialist in constructing of railways in deserts and highlands. The Chinese Eastern Railway was to cross Manchuria, Harbin, Pogornichi and Changchun, with Port Arthur in Korea as its final destination. The construction of the line began in August 1897 and opened for traffic in November 1903 in the same year. Several Russian Jewish families moved to Harbin. They had the approval of the Tsarist government that was interested in developing the area as rapidly as possible. Bear in mind, this is a Jewish site. The Jews who settled in Harbin were granted better status than were the Jews in Russia. So, the Fangerish family and friends. There's all the Jews of Harbin. Right, so they're the delegates of the first regional conference of Zionists in the Far East, Harbin, in 1919. So the Jews, along with other minority groups such as the Karaites, were granted plots of land on the outskirts of the town. They were not allowed to work directly on the railway. So Jews weren't allowed to work on the railway, so who's going to build the railway if Jews aren't allowed to build it when it's just said that they were building it? With the development of the area, however, they were able to establish businesses as shopkeepers and contractors. Early 20th century. In 1903, a self-governing community of about 500 Jews existed in Harbin. A self-governing community. After the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, many demobilized Jewish soldiers settled in Harbin. Are we still thinking that it's self-governing at this time? They were followed by refugees. Are they still self-governing? From the 1905-07 pogroms in southern western Russian gubernias regions. By 1908, there were about 8,000 Jews in the city. That wasn't even a city, because it just said it was just villages, but now it's a city already, so they're still self-governing. The growing Jewish population decided to build a new synagogue, which was called the Main Synagogue in China, we're talking about now. It was built on Artilleriskaya Street in the Pristan district, now in Tongyang Street, Daoli district. Its foundation was laid on May the 3rd, with the Jews banned from laying foundations as well, who put foundations in. And the building completed 2 years later in January 1909. The first Jewish cemetery in China was opened in Harbin in 1903, which later had more than 2,000 tombs. Several institutions came into being within the community, including clubs, a home for the aged, and a hospital, which provided care for Jews as well as the general population. Well, there wasn't a general population, you had some other minority groups, but basically it's just been getting Jews up to bits. A Heder religious elementary school was established in Harbin in 1907, and a Jewish secondary school, the Everskaya Gymnasia, in 1909, which had over 100 pupils by 1910. 70% of the Jewish pupils, however, attended non-Jewish schools, since there were not enough classes in the Jewish schools in Harbin, which is classic Jewish assimilation. Like it's not integration or assimilation, it's Jewish domination. So what they'll go in, like they'll be allowed into the schools, and basically they find out who's who, what's what, what's going on, who's running whatever that they're not running, and then they'll come in and they'll run it, because this is a self-governing community in a city that it's not a city, but it's a city. So in 1913, the chief rabbi of the Jewish community of Harbin was Alexander Kisilev, author of several works on halakha. And you know halakha means that halakha is the law that governs Jews to say that all non-Jews must live under Judaism. And books Nationalism in Evaristo, so that's nationalism and Judaism. So I guess Evaristo is Russian for Judaism, which were published in Russian in 1941. Family dynasties, right? Family dynasties such as the Bonner. Now the Bonner, I would suggest, are the Bonnier family of the Swedish press. They have the monopoly on the Swedish press. The Kabalkin, the kin of the Cabal, the Kroll, the Mendelevich, the Samsonovich, and the Skidelsky families played an important role in development of the local industries, especially wood and coal industries. Yeah, probably like saving loans and granting grants and doing everything that Jews do in order to not pick up a spade or do anything contributory. They'll do everything administratively. So they were also instrumental in expanding trade relations with the Russian Empire, or were they now, as well as the European countries, Japan and the United States. Oh well, they're very busy, aren't they, setting up all these trade routes between Europe, Japan, United States. Very kind of them, isn't it? You know, rather well positioned there in Harbin, aren't they? Which Heilongjiang is the agricultural province of China. Basically, it's just one great big field where you can grow crops. So in November 1914, following the outbreak of World War I, the Jewish community of Harbin joined the Ekapol Jewish Committee for the Help of War Victims. This voluntary organisation was active during the war years and disbanded in 1920 under the demand of the Bolsheviks. For example, in February 1914, Dr. Abraham Kaufman, now we had a Jared Kaufman here in the UK Parliament, head of the Harbin branch of Ekapol, received a telegram from the Committee of Assistance to Pogrom Victims from the city of Samara on the Volga River with a plea for assistance. So the Bolsheviks are telling the Jews what to do in China. And this is before Mao, you know, a long time before Mao. This is like 1914. So it's still under the Kuomintang. So during their operation, ECOPO helped more than 200,000 war refugees. The committee organised distribution of food among refugees, established dormitories, hospitals, professional courses and more to help the people. Well, the people are all the Jews, aren't they? Because it's just said that. They're building the city here. This is a hive. After World War One, the Jewish community was sharply increased by the influx of Jewish refugees during World War One, the Russian Revolution, the Russian Civil War. It reached its peak to 10,000, stroke 15,000 in the early 30s, but declined to about 5,000 in 1939. Several Jewish organizations were established in Harbin. Among these was a Jewish secondary school, the Talmud Torah, later the Jewish National School, a hospital Mishmeret Holim, a hostel for aged people of the Moshav Shkenim, a school for professional education for women, a Jewish library, as well as the new synagogue. They are members of the Nuri Zion Association of Harbin 1919. This is in China. The group of the best are members in Harbin 1936. This is the members of the Betar Harbin 1930, first from the right, Mordecai Olmert. So the Jewish National Bank was created in 1923. National Bank, right? Harbin has a Jewish National Bank. Following the efforts of A.M. Pataka, D.N. Gananansky, Dr. A. Kaufman, who was mentioned earlier, M.Y. Elkin, M.J. Trotsky, Dr. S.M. Vector, G.B. Drisson, M.I. Schuster, and Y. Bina that initiated this project. Already in 1919, the bank's prime customers were Jewish businesses in need of cheap credit, but later it also catered for the needs of the wider business community, and the bank ceased operation in 1950. So along with the Communist Revolution, 1949, the setup of the Chinese state, and the Jewish National Bank shuts down. Well, that sounds like a reorganisation in bankruptcy to me. The city's first branch of modern hotels, banks, shops, cafes, newspapers and publishing houses were initiated by members of the Jewish community and helped boost the city's business. Practically all enterprises in Harbin at that time, whether bakeries or coal mines or mills, were closely connected with Jewish economic activity. In addition to 1926, there were 28 companies owned by Jews. Harbin was also a well-known cultural centre, which was just a few villages, only 20 years before. During the 1920s and 1930s, many famous Jewish actors came to Harbin to give performances. These helped promote the spread of Western music in China, where the Jewish influence on Harbin music education can be seen today. Between 1918 and 1930, about 20 Jewish newspapers and periodicals were also established. All were in Russian, except the Yiddish Der Weiter Mitzrech the Far East, which was published 3 times a week. It had a circulation of about 300 copies in 1921 to 22, which would be the formation of the 1921 committee in Britain, which then led to the Pico-Sykes document, which led to the Balfour Declaration, which led to the blowing up of the King David Hotel and the British-Palestinian Mandate, which led to the Stern Gang being the rulers of Israel, which are now Likud. The Russian language weekly, I'm not even, Yevroskaya Zhizn, Jewish Life, which until 1926 was called as Siberia Palestinia, Siberia Palestinia, appeared from 1929 to 1940 with the circulation throughout Manchuria and North China. An English supplement was added to coincide with the establishment of the Jewish National Council of the Far East. So you've got to look at like the Jewish Autonomous Oblast being situated just near, well, not too far from Harbin, but certainly central between, Russia, Mongolia, China, not too far away is India. It's like it's a prominent position to hold a fort, if you like New York, like Miami, like Amsterdam, like London. All of these. Have you noticed that they're the first port of call sort of place? Like it's like port of call stroke central. Israel, look at Israel. It's like slap bang in the middle of three continents. What a most convenient spec. So the Zionist movement, the Zionist movement led by Abraham Kaufman and several youth clubs played a major part in the life of the community. Until 1921, Zionists of Harbin were affiliated with the Russian and Siberian Zionist organization and participated in their conferences. To further the activities of the Zionist movement, a branch of the Maccabi Jewish youth movement was established in 1921, and it functioned until 1925. The Harbin Jewish Women's Association, linked to the WIZO, was established in Harbin in 1922, and the first meeting of WIZO was held in the same year. So from 1921 to 1925, several groups of youths from Hashomer Zionist movement emigrated to Palestine. The Harbin branch of the Hashomer Hatzair was set up in 1927, and in 1929 the Zionist youth movement Betar was founded, mainly by a large group of former members of the Hashomer Hatzair movement. The introduction of the new economic policy in the Soviet Union in 1925 stimulated another wave of Jewish emigration, some crossing the borders illegally, while others received assistance from the Jewish community. I would suggest that they would be the same, in order to pay the large amounts of money in foreign currency required by the Soviet government for issuing visas. When Zionism was outlawed in the Soviet Union, Harbin became an island of Russian-language Zionism. In the years from 1924 to 1931, the Soviet regime, largely preoccupied with internal problems, exercised limited influence on Manchurian territory. In 1931, the Japanese army occupied Harbin and the Manchurian territory. The first of three Zionist conferences of the Jewish communities of the Far East was held in Harbin in December 1937. During the first conference, because of ideological differences, a revisionist Zionist wing moved to lead an independent political activity, which is what we're seeing now with the Jewish Labour Party of Britain turning into the Jewish Independent Group. The revisionist Zionists held three more conferences which were attended by Japanese and Manchurian authorities. The Japanese tried to use Harbin and Shanghai Jewish communities to entice Western investment into their co-prosperity sphere. At the second conference, the possibility of a Jewish flag was proposed, green and white with the Star of David, or blue and white flag of the Zionist Revisionist Party, more like the Zionist Revolutionary Party. The Japanese maintained relations with the Jewish communities of Harbin and Shanghai, hoping through them to win investment and favourable influence from Western Jews, the so-called Fugu Plan. The second conference was held in 1938 and the third in 1939. At the last conference, discussions were held of the possible integration of German and Austrian Jews who sought refuge in China. These conferences were important in leading to the consolidation of the Jewish communities in China. The Japanese authorities did not allow the fourth conference that was supposed to be held in 1940 under Russian rule. The Jews of Harbin enjoyed the same rights as all other foreigners and were left alone to develop their own way. However, in 1928, when the Chinese Eastern Railway was handed over to Chinese, an economic crisis broke out. Oh, what a surprise. And many Jews left Harbin. Some went to the Soviet Union, where apparently they were refugee in Harbin. So, yeah, let's go back to the Soviet Union. Others to Shanghai, others to Tianjin, which is Tianjin, like we said before, and other cities in China. This situation changed drastically for the worse with the Japanese occupation of Manchuria and the establishment of a puppet regime under which Jews were subjected to terror and extortion. Oh, the poor Jews. So Abraham Kaufman, a native of Miglin, a tiny Jewish village near Chernigov, Russia, on his mother's side, was a great-grandson of Zalma Schneerson, the founder of the Chabad movement. Scary stuff. In 1903, he graduated from gymnasium in Perm, Russia, where he was drawn into Zionist activity. He began his studies of medicine in 1904 at the University of Bern, Switzerland. In 1908, he decided to return to Russia, then settled in Harbin in 1912 and became involved in community life and international Zionist activity. As you do, you study medicine, next thing you're an international Zionist. Kaufman was elected as vice chairman of the National Jewish Council of Siberia and Urals between 1919 and 1931 and 1933 and 1945. He was the chairman of the Jewish community of Harbin, chairman of the Jewish National Fund, and Keren Hayesod, board member of the World Zionist Organization and the Jewish Agency, and chairman of the Jewish Zionist Organization of China. Flaming hell, he's busier than I can even say. Kaufman inspired the activity of practically every cultural and community organization of Harbin Jews. During 1921 to 1943, he was the chief editor of the Evroskaya Jewish Life, a weekly magazine in Russian. He served as medical director of the Jewish Hospital in Harbin. In 1937, he was chairman of the National Council of the Jews of Eastern Asia, Far East. In this position, Kaufman succeeded in persuading the Japanese occupation forces to abolish the decision of their German allies to concentrate the Jewish population into special ghettos. Now you've got to remember that, most of this movement seems to be in Harbin, just after the Boxer Rebellion, which is where, also known as the Third Opium War, or the invasion of the 10 nations, where basically all of the countries that were Jewed up to bits, like Britain, Germany, America, so many, let's say in America, 1905, the assassination of President McKinley over the free silver. Or if you had the failed Russian Revolution, it's the run-up to World War One. You've got the Russian-Japanese War, the Russian-Manchurian War. You've got all sorts going on, and right in the middle of it all, it's just Jews, and more Jews. So Kaufman succeeded in persuading the Japanese occupational forces to abolish the decision of their German allies to concentrate the Jewish population into special ghettos. I wonder how he managed to persuade them like that. Wow. His Japanese must have been pretty nifty. He was arrested in 1945 by the Soviet Red Army, accused of collaboration with alien forces, and spent 11 years in a labour camp. Sure. In 1956 he moved to Karaganda, now a city in Kazakhstan, and in 1961 emigrated to Israel, where he died in Tel Aviv in 1971. Then you've got Mordecai Olmert. The origin of the name Olmert is not known, because Jews didn't have surnames until such times as Napoleon made it like mandatory by law that everyone had to have a surname. So the origin of the name wasn't known, Olmert. Even the members of the family, Mordecai Olmert's great-grandfather, was kidnapped as a young child by the Tsar's army and forced to serve in it for 25 years. Jews were mandated to serve 25 years in the Russian army, which actually seemed to serve them well, because after that conscription stopped and Jews were sort of being more outed by the Tsars as Russia was becoming more prosperous. Look at that. Jews are outed and Russia becomes more prosperous. So Tsars started getting assassinated. When finally released, he settled in the city of Samara on the river Volga. Released. Yeah. And when asked for his name, gave it as Olmert. I think Olmert's like a Turkish name. Possibly remember it in a distorted way from his childhood. Mordecai was born in 1911. The family prospered in Samara, but their days of peace and happiness were numbered. The Bolshevik Revolution, headed by Jews, unleashed all the anti-Semitic forces, both red and white, and the Jews of Samara, as in so many other places, became the classic scapegoats. Well, this is where they all jump to places like New York, Miami, Harbin, London. The Olmer family fled what had become a madhouse to Manchuria. So these went to Harbin in northeastern China, and they had business connections. Oh, just got business connections just like that. And where Jewish and Russian Christian communities were emerging as part of a Russian drive towards Manchuria, the Olmerts settled in the town of Sitikar near Harbin. Young Mordecai Olmert aspired to move to Harbin, where, with its 10,000 Jews, he believed he would be able to pursue his growing interest in Jewish affairs. Now, 10,000 is a funny number in Asia, because 10,000 means like, tons or loads. It doesn't necessarily mean 10,000, like the 10,000 things, it just means that there's loads and loads and loads of them. So it could well be used in that context. Who's counting that there's 10,000 of them? So when he was 16 years old, he was drawn to Zionist activity, but he was not satisfied with the only movement in Harbin at the time, the Hashemar Hatzair. Together with his fascination with the personality of Zev Jablonski, the ideology of the revisionist movement swayed him, and thus began his lifelong dedication to it. Convincing a group of other young people, he established a local chapter of the Betar youth movement, an involvement that became the focus of his life. There, at the time, he met his lifelong partner and companion, Bella Nee Vugman, herself a dedicated member of the Betar movement. Betar became the dominant movement in Harbin, and Mordecai was forever proud of the fact that many Jewish members of other movements, including communists, joined Betar. Unlike many other Jews, Mordecai insisted on studying at a Chinese rather than Russian high school. He never in his life forgot the Chinese language. Well, certainly worthwhile when you're looking at taking over the whole country. In 1930, Mordecai left Harbin, beginning his long road to Palestine, first stopping in Holland to study agriculture, which obviously Holland is about as innovative as you can get when it comes to agriculture, because Holland basically built their own nation as it was just on water over the last 100 years. So he's probably been there when, the start of the land forming of Holland. So agriculture is absolutely, tip top in Holland. At a Hashahara farm. Have you got a Jewish farm in Holland? He arrived finally in Eretz Israel. Isn't it funny, Israel is basically covered by desert. They've even got a desert. What did they say? They were lost for 40 years, weren't they, the Jews in the desert? But actually, if you look on the map, on Google Maps, the desert that they got lost in would take literally half a day, maybe 2 days at most, to walk across. Is it the Negev? I think, 40 years they wandered in the Negev desert. It only takes two hours to walk across from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, or whatever it is. The Mediterranean to the Red Sea. The Med to the Red to the Dead. And they got lost for 40 years. Sure. So in 1930 he left Arbin. So however, his connection with Arbin had not ended. In 1947, Mordecai was ordered by Menachem Begin. So we're talking top-level Jews here. The chief commander of the Etzel, to raise funds for the ship Altalena. Mordecai headed for China, visiting Jewish communities there, gravitating to Harbin. Well, doesn't that imply that there was Jewish communities all over China, and Harbin was the capital, as it said before, until 1950, when that's when they've handed over the keys, and by another name now. His charismatic appearance, so I'm sure he was charismatic, helped raise the needed funds. The Jewish ladies threw their jewellery on the table to him. Mordecai Olmert felt that he had come home full circle. Mordecai was a lifelong activist in the revisionist movement, later Herut, serving as a member of Knesset and heading the settlement department of the Herut movement, through which he founded various villages and towns all over Israel. He retired to his farm in the village of Binyamina, which I think is in that, is that Netanyahu, where he passed away in 1998. The biography of Mordecai Olmert was contributed by Linda Olmert. So there is on a fundraising mission in Shanghai. So they're all Jews in Shanghai. And he's getting funds there, On the left, Yaakov Lieberman, head of the Betar movement in Shanghai. The visual documentations of Betar. World War II. So the attitude of authorities towards the Jews became even more oppressive in World War II, when the Japanese, as Axis partners and under the influence of Russian right-wing emigres, adopted an anti-Semitic policy during Japanese rule. Jewish national life was kept alive by the Zionist youth movement. So they do see themselves as a nation within a nation. So particularly the Betar and the Maccabee, they're the ones who, wasn't it some war, the Maccabees somehow managed to cheat the way to winning or whatever it was, and they draw a lot of strength from that story. Who organised Jewish cultural activities. Betar, which was the strongest Zionist youth organisation, published a Russian-language magazine, Har Degel, The Flag. Alexander Y. Gorovich, as editor, headed it until his departure from Harbin in 1941, when the position was taken by Shmuel A. Klein, who edited the magazine for the year until the Japanese closed it in 1942. In 1943, under the pressure of the German embassy in Tokyo, the Japanese authorities in Harbin ordered the closing of the Jewish Life magazine. Following World War II, 4 synagogues functioned in Harbin until 1950. Many Jews left Manchuria, before the outbreak of World War II, emigrating to US, Australia, Brazil, other countries. During 1945 to 1947, Harbin was under Soviet occupation. Jewish community leaders